There is a place on this earth where the cold is not just weather. It is a presence. It breathes. It waits. It decides, every single morning, whether you are allowed to step outside and survive another day. That place is Siberia. And most people, when they hear that name, picture emptiness. A blank white stretch on a map. A punishment. A place you are sent to, not a place you choose. For over 2 centuries, the Russian Empire used Siberia as its great exile. A frozen cage at the edge of the known world, where criminals, rebels, and political enemies were sent to disappear. And many of them did. But here is what those maps never show you. Here is what the history books quietly skip over. Siberia is not empty. It never was. Siberia is the size of the entire continent of North America. Wrap your head around that for a second. You could drop the United States, Canada, and Mexico into Siberia, and still have room left over. And yet, despite its unimaginable scale, only about 33 million people call it home. That is roughly the population of California, spread across a landmass that stretches from the Ural Mountains all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Nearly 10,000 kilometers of taiga, tundra, frozen rivers, and silence so deep it has its own sound. And somewhere inside all of that silence, people are living. Fully, completely, defiantly living. I want to tell you about those people today. Not the Siberia of gulags and exile. Not the Siberia of Cold War propaganda. The real Siberia, the one that existed long before Russia claimed it, long before any empire drew its borders across the permafrost. A Siberia of ancient indigenous tribes who have survived here for thousands of years. Of fishermen who cut holes in ice 2 meters thick and call it a Tuesday. Of children who walked to school in temperatures that would shut down entire cities in Europe or America. Of cities buried under snow for 8 months of the year that somehow, impossibly, still pulse with culture, music, food, and life. This is a place where time did not just slow down. In some corners it stopped entirely. And in stopping, it preserved something the rest of the world lost a long time ago. There is a village in the Sakha Republic, deep in the northeastern stretch of Siberia, called Oymyakon. It holds a record that no city, no town, no human settlement on Earth has ever come close to breaking. In 1924, the temperature in Oymyakon dropped to minus 71.2 degrees Celsius. That is minus 96 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, the moisture in your breath freezes before it leaves your mouth. Fuel lines crack. Batteries die within minutes. And yet, people live there. Right now, today, as you watch this video, there are families in Oymyakon waking up, making breakfast, sending their kids to school, going about their day as though the world outside their window is perfectly normal. Because to them it is. That is the thing about Siberia that I did not understand until I came here. The cold is not the story. The cold is just the setting. The story is the people who chose the cold, or rather, the people who were here long before anyone thought to ask whether this land was livable, and simply decided it was because it was theirs. The indigenous peoples of Siberia, the Yakuts, the Evenks, the Buryats, the Nenets, the Chukchi, and dozens of other groups, did not survive Siberia by fighting it. They survived it by becoming part of it. By learning its rhythms, its seasons, its moods. By building homes that breathe with the permafrost instead of against it. By herding reindeer across frozen tundra using navigation systems passed down through oral tradition for thousands of years, long before satellites, long before GPS, long before anyone in the Western world even knew this land existed. And when the Russian Empire finally arrived in the 16th century, pushing east in search of fur, land, and power, it did not tame Siberia. Not really. It planted flags. It built forts. It sent its criminals and its dreamers and its Cossack soldiers. But Siberia absorbed all of them. It changed the people who came here far more than they ever changed it. That is still true today. I have been to a lot of places in this world. Places that are beautiful, places that are ancient, places that carry the weight of history in every stone and every street. But there is something about Siberia that is different from all of them. It is not just old. It is primal. It is the kind of place that makes you feel, very suddenly and very clearly, how small you are. And in that smallness, something strange happens. You start to feel more alive than you have in years. So if you have ever wondered what it looks like when a civilization decides to plant itself in the harshest place on the planet and simply refuse to leave, this is that story. Welcome to Siberia. Let's go. Long before the word Siberia existed, this land had a heartbeat. Archaeological evidence tells us that humans have lived across the Siberian expanse for at least 40,000 years. Some sites suggest even longer. These were not wandering bands of lost nomads stumbling through the cold. These were sophisticated, adaptive, deeply rooted civilizations that built entire ways of life around one of the most demanding environments the planet has ever produced. The Scythians roamed the southern steppes. The Xiongnu, the same nomadic confederation that terrified the Chinese Empire into building the Great Wall, controlled vast stretches of what is now southern Siberia. Long before Rome was dreaming of conquest, before Greece was writing philosophy, people here were trading, warring, raising children, burying their dead with ceremony, and looking up at the same sky we look at today. The indigenous groups that remain today, the Yakuts, the Evenks, the Buryats, the Nenets, are not remnants of a forgotten past. They are living continuations of it. Their languages, their spiritual practices, their relationship to the land, carry thousands of years of unbroken memory. Shamanism, the ancient spiritual tradition that sees the world as layered with spirits, where the physical and the invisible are in constant conversation, was born and refined here in Siberia, long before the word religion existed in any European language. Then came Russia. In the late 16th century, the Tsardom of Russia began its relentless push eastward. Cossack explorers, armed with muskets and driven by the promise of fur, the oil of its era, crossed the Ural Mountains and entered a world they had no framework to understand. They moved fast. Within decades, Russia had claimed territories that took other empires centuries to absorb. By 1639, Russian explorers had already reached the Pacific coast. But claiming land on a map and actually controlling it are two very different things. Siberia was never truly conquered. It was outlined. What the Russian Empire managed to do was draw a border around something it could never fully contain. And so Siberia became many things at once: a source of immense wealth, a dumping ground for the unwanted, and a mirror that reflected back to every civilization that touched it exactly how much they did not understand about the natural world. If you want to understand modern Siberia, you have to understand one word: katorga. Katorga was the Russian system of penal labor, forced exile to the far reaches of the empire, where prisoners were put to work in mines, in forests, in conditions that were designed not just to punish but to erase. From the 17th century onward, Siberia became Russia's shadow, the place where inconvenient people were made to disappear without the messiness of a public execution. And the list of people sent here reads like a who's who of Russian intellectual and political history. The writer Fyodor Dostoevsky spent 4 years in a Siberian labor camp after being convicted of revolutionary activity. The experience broke him, rebuilt him, and produced some of the most profound literature the world has ever read. He wrote later that those years showed him the full depth of human suffering, and the full depth of human resilience. The Decembrists, a group of Russian military officers who staged an uprising against the Tsar in 1825, were exiled to Siberia along with their families. Some of their wives voluntarily gave up their titles, their wealth, and their lives in St. Petersburg to follow their husbands into the frozen East. They built schools. They started libraries. They brought culture to towns that had none. Even in exile, people create. Then came the Soviet era, and with it, the Gulag, a network of forced labor camps that, at its peak, stretched across the entire length and breadth of Siberia. Between the 1930s and the 1950s, millions of Soviet citizens, political dissidents, ethnic minorities, ordinary people caught in the machinery of Stalinist paranoia, were sent to these camps. Many never returned. The Siberian permafrost holds more history than any museum could ever contain. And yet, and this is the part that is easy to miss, exile also populated Siberia. The people who were sent here, who survived, who had children and grandchildren, they stayed. They built towns. They planted roots into the frozen ground. The descendants of exiles and the descendants of indigenous tribes and the descendants of Cossack explorers all eventually became one thing: Siberian. There is a particular toughness to a Siberian. Not aggressive, not boastful, just quietly, completely unbreakable. As if the land itself selected for it over generations, kept the ones who could endure, shaped them into something the rest of the world has no precise word for. You feel it the moment you arrive. In the way people shake your hand. In the way they pour your tea. In the way they look at the cold outside their window, not with dread but with something closer to respect. Siberia did not break its people. Made them. There is no single Siberia. That is the first thing you need to understand when you try to picture this place. Most people imagine one thing: white, flat, frozen, endless. But Siberia is not a landscape. It is a collection of worlds stacked side by side, each one more extreme than the last, each one operating by its own rules. In the west, just beyond the Ural Mountains, the land opens into the West Siberian Plain, one of the largest flatlands on Earth. In spring, when the snow melts faster than the frozen ground beneath can absorb it, this entire region transforms into an almost incomprehensible wetland. Millions of square kilometers of marshes, bogs, and shallow lakes appear almost overnight. It becomes one of the most important bird migration corridors on the planet, hosting hundreds of millions of birds passing through each year. Then winter returns and it all freezes solid again as if the water was never there. Move further east and the terrain shifts entirely. The central Siberian plateau rises up, ancient, weathered, carved by rivers that have been cutting through rock for millions of years. The Lena River, one of the longest rivers in the world, begins its journey here, eventually stretching over 4,000 kilometers before emptying into the Arctic Ocean. In winter, the Lena freezes so completely and so solidly that trucks and cars drive across it as a functioning road. In spring, when it breaks apart, the ice moves with such force that it has been known to crush steel bridges like paper. And then there is Lake Baikal. If Siberia has a soul, Baikal is where it lives. This lake, and calling it a lake almost feels like an insult, contains 20% of all the unfrozen fresh surface water on Earth. Not in Russia, not in Asia, on the entire planet. It is the deepest lake in the world, plunging over 1,600 meters at its lowest point. It is so large that standing on its shore, you cannot see the other side. It looks, feels, and behaves like an ocean. On clear winter days, the ice that covers it becomes so pure and transparent that you can look straight down through 2 meters of solid ice and watch the water moving beneath your feet like dark glass. Baikal is also one of the oldest lakes on Earth, roughly 25 million years old. It has been sitting in this valley, collecting water and evolving life, since before the Himalayas finished forming. Over 3,600 species of plants and animals live in and around it, more than 2/3 of which exist nowhere else on Earth. Including the Nerpa, the world's only freshwater seal, a small, round, impossibly endearing creature that somehow ended up in the middle of a continent, thousands of kilometers from any ocean, and simply decided to stay. Like everyone else in Siberia. Let's talk about the cold properly. Not as a dramatic device. Not as a metaphor. As a physical reality that shapes every single aspect of life in Siberia in ways that are almost impossible to fully communicate from the outside. Siberia experiences what climatologists call a continental subarctic climate, characterized by some of the most extreme temperature swings on Earth. In Yakutsk, the largest city built on continuous permafrost in the world, summer temperatures can reach 38 degrees Celsius. Warm enough to swim. Warm enough to sweat. And then, 4 months later, the same city will see temperatures drop to -50. That is an annual temperature range of nearly 90 degrees, a swing that no other major city on Earth comes close to matching. At -40, which is the same in both Celsius and Fahrenheit, the scales converge at that precise point, as if even mathematics acknowledges this as a threshold. Strange things begin to happen. Exposed skin freezes in minutes. Diesel fuel thickens and engines refuse to start unless they are kept running through the night. Glasses freeze to your face. Breath hangs in the air in dense clouds that drift slowly and then simply fall, crystallizing before they reach the ground. Locals call this phenomenon the whisper of the stars, the soft hissing sound of moisture freezing mid-air on the coldest nights. And yet the city functions. Buses run. Schools open. Restaurants fill up. People dress in layers so specifically engineered, fur closest to the skin, then wool, then a heavy outer shell, that they have essentially developed a personal microclimate they carry with them everywhere they go. The permafrost beneath Yakutsk is over a kilometer deep in some places. Buildings cannot have basements. Foundations must be driven into the frozen ground on stilts, elevated above the surface so that the heat from the building does not melt the permafrost beneath it and cause the structure to sink. Walk through the older parts of the city and you will see buildings that tilted and sank anyway, ghost structures leaning at impossible angles, slowly being swallowed by the ground they were built on. Even the earth here refuses to be tamed. But the people have figured it out. Not by conquering the cold. By negotiating with it. By learning exactly how far they can push and exactly when to step back inside. There is a wisdom in that. A patience that the modern world, obsessed with control and convenience, has almost entirely forgotten. Siberia remembers. You cannot understand Siberia through its geography alone. The land is extraordinary, yes, but it is the people who make it truly unforgettable. Walk into any home in a small Siberian town and within 5 minutes, there will be food on the table. It does not matter if you are a stranger. It does not matter if you arrived unannounced. Hospitality in Siberia is not a courtesy, it is a code. It is something older than manners, older than social grace. It comes from a time when refusing shelter to a traveler in these temperatures was not rude. It was a death sentence. And that instinct, open your door, feed whoever is standing in the cold, never left. The indigenous peoples of Siberia carry this deepest of all. The Yakuts, who call themselves the Sakha, are one of the largest indigenous groups in the region. Roughly 500,000 people with their own republic, their own language, their own literature and music and cinema. They have survived here for centuries not by retreating from Siberian life but by mastering it so completely that their culture became inseparable from the landscape itself. The Sakha have a tradition called the Isyak, a summer solstice festival celebrated every June, when the sun barely sets and the world briefly exhales from the cold. People gather in enormous open fields dressed in elaborate traditional clothing, intricately embroidered and layered, carrying the visual memory of generations. There is music, throat singing, ceremonial horse rituals, and a communal fermented mare's milk called kumis passed around in wooden cups. It is joyful and ancient and deeply, fiercely alive. And then there are the Evenks, a nomadic reindeer-herding people spread across the largest territory of any indigenous group in Siberia. The Evenks follow their herds across thousands of kilometers of taiga every year, living in portable conical tents called chums, navigating landscapes with no roads, no markers, no infrastructure, using knowledge of wind, star, river, and animal behavior passed down through generations of oral tradition. They do not see themselves as surviving the wilderness. They see themselves as part of it. To spend time with these communities is to feel something shift inside you. A recalibration. The relentless noise of modern life, the notifications, the deadlines, the performance of busyness, falls away completely. What is left is something quieter and more honest. The rhythm of a fire. The sound of snow under boots. A meal shared without agenda. In a world that is accelerating faster than most of us can process, Siberia offers something genuinely rare. The experience of slowing down not as a luxury but as a way of life. Not all of Siberia is wilderness and nomadic herders. Scattered across this vast expanse are cities, real, functioning, modern cities, that most of the outside world has never heard of and would be stunned to discover. Take Novosibirsk. With nearly 1.7 million people, it is the third largest city in Russia and the largest city in Siberia. It sits on the banks of the Ob River and was essentially born from a single bridge, the Trans-Siberian Railway bridge, built in the 1890s, around which a settlement rapidly grew into one of the fastest developing cities in Russian history. Today, Novosibirsk has a world-class opera house, one of the largest in the world by stage area, that sits in the heart of the city like a quiet declaration. We are here. We built something beautiful. Come and see. The Novosibirsk Opera and Ballet Theater was built during World War II, in the early 1940s, when the Soviet Union was pouring every resource it had into surviving the German invasion. And yet, construction continued. Because even in the middle of catastrophe, the people of Siberia insisted on culture, insisted on beauty, insisted on art as a form of resistance against despair. That instinct runs through every Siberian city you visit. Yakutsk, often called the Paris of Siberia, which sounds like an exaggeration until you walk its streets, is filled with stunning 19th-century wooden architecture, intricately carved and painted, lining avenues that run alongside the Angara River. The city became a cultural hub partly because of its exiles, the Decembrists and their educated, aristocratic wives who brought libraries, schools, and salons to a frontier town. Their influence never left. Irkutsk today has a density of theaters, galleries, and universities that would impress cities 3 times its size. Then there is Yakutsk, already mentioned for its extraordinary cold, but worth returning to for something else entirely. Yakutsk has developed a film industry, a real one. Yakutian cinema, produced almost entirely in the Sakha language with local actors and local stories, has been quietly stunning international film festival audiences for the past decade. Films made in one of the coldest, most remote cities on Earth are winning awards in Europe, drawing comparisons to early Korean cinema in their raw emotional power and distinctive visual language. It is perhaps the most Siberian thing imaginable, to be so far from the centers of power and influence, so completely overlooked by the rest of the world, and to simply get on with creating something extraordinary anyway. That is what Siberia does. It takes what the world ignores and it turns it into something worth remembering. If there is one human creation that comes closest to matching the scale of Siberia itself, it is the railway that runs through it. The Trans-Siberian Railway is the longest railway line in the world. Stretching 9,289 kilometers from Moscow in the west to Vladivostok on the Pacific coast in the east, It crosses 8 time zones, spans 2 continents, bridges hundreds of rivers, and passes through some of the most remote and breathtaking landscapes on the planet. To ride it from beginning to end takes approximately 7 days without stopping. A full week of watching the world change outside your window, from the dense birch forests of the Urals to the endless taiga of central Siberia to the dramatic hills and valleys approaching the Pacific. It was built between 1891 and 1916, an engineering undertaking so ambitious that it strains belief even by modern standards. Tens of thousands of workers, peasants, soldiers, convicts, Chinese and Korean laborers, laid track by hand across permafrost through mountain ranges, alongside the edge of Lake Baikal, where the terrain was so sheer and so unforgiving that engineers had to blast tunnels directly through solid rock just to keep the line moving forward. Workers died in the hundreds from accidents, disease, and the cold. The railway consumed lives the way Siberia consumes everything, completely and without apology. And yet it was finished. And when it changed Russia permanently. Before the Trans-Siberian, Siberia was effectively cut off from the rest of the empire. Goods moved by river in summer and by sled in winter, slowly, expensively, unreliably. The railway collapsed that distance almost overnight. Suddenly, settlers could move east in days instead of months. Goods could flow west. Cities could grow. The railway did not just connect Siberia to Russia. It made modern Siberia possible. Today the train still runs. Every day. In both directions. And to ride it is one of the great travel experiences left on Earth. Not because it is comfortable or fast or glamorous, but because of what it gives you that almost nothing else can anymore. Time. Uninterrupted, uncommitted time, moving through a landscape so vast and so unchanged that the 21st century starts to feel very far away. Strangers share compartments, and over glasses of tea brewed from the samovar at the end of the carriage, become something close to friends. Food is passed. Stories are told. Children press their faces against the glass and watch Siberia scroll past like a dream that never quite ends. There is a particular moment on the journey, somewhere in the deep middle of Siberia, usually in the early hours of the morning when the train is quiet and the world outside is completely dark, when you look out the window and see nothing. No lights. No roads. No signs of human presence in any direction. Just trees and sky and the faint reflection of your own face in the glass. It is one of the loneliest feelings in the world. And one of the most beautiful. Siberia in the 21st century is a place caught between 2 gravitational pulls, the ancient and the modern, the preserved and the endangered, the forgotten and the suddenly, urgently relevant. Beneath the permafrost that covers roughly 65% of Russia's territory lies an almost incomprehensible wealth of natural resources. Siberia holds some of the world's largest reserves of oil, natural gas, coal, diamonds, gold, and rare earth metals. The extraction of these resources has driven Russian economic policy for decades, and the infrastructure built around it, pipelines, mining operations, industrial cities, has reshaped entire stretches of the Siberian landscape permanently. But the permafrost itself is changing. As global temperatures rise, the frozen ground that Siberia's entire ecosystem, and much of its human infrastructure, is built upon is beginning to thaw. Buildings are sinking. Coastlines are collapsing into the sea. Ancient methane, trapped in the permafrost for thousands of years, is being released into the atmosphere. In some parts of Siberia, massive craters have appeared suddenly in the tundra, sinkholes caused by exploding pockets of methane gas released by thawing ground, some of them large enough to swallow apartment buildings whole. Scientists call Siberia a critical indicator, a place where the effects of climate change are appearing faster and more visibly than almost anywhere else on Earth. What happens in the Siberian permafrost does not stay in Siberia. The methane released here will affect weather patterns, sea levels, and temperatures across the entire planet for generations to come. And yet, alongside this slow emergency, life continues with remarkable stubbornness. Young people in Yakutsk are building tech startups. Artists in Yakutsk are filling galleries. Indigenous communities are fighting, loudly, legally, persistently, to protect their languages, their lands, and their right to continue living in the ways their ancestors perfected over thousands of years. There is a Sakha proverb that translates roughly as, "The one who bends with the wind does not break." It is a philosophy born from surviving winters that would defeat almost anyone else. And it applies, perhaps more than ever, to what Siberia is navigating right now, the collision between a way of life refined over millennia and a world that is changing faster than any permafrost has ever thawed. Siberia is not standing still, but it is standing. And in a world where so much has already been lost, there is something deeply important about a place that refuses, stubbornly, quietly, absolutely, to disappear. I want to tell you something that I have been thinking about since the moment I first set foot on Siberian soil, and have not stopped thinking about since. We live in an age of speed. Everything around us is optimized for faster communication, faster delivery, faster results, faster everything. We have built an entire civilization around the idea that time is the enemy, that distance is a problem to be solved, that silence is uncomfortable and emptiness is wasted space. We scroll through the world at a pace that makes depth impossible. We consume places the way we consume content, quickly, partially, moving on before anything has had a chance to settle. Siberia is the direct opposite of all of that. Siberia demands slowness. It requires patience. It will not be rushed, photographed in an afternoon, understood in a weekend, or summarized in a caption. It is a place that gives itself up only gradually, only to those willing to sit with it long enough to hear what it is actually saying beneath the cold and the quiet and the vast indifferent white. And what it says, if you listen, is this: endurance is not the absence of struggle. It is the decision to remain inside the struggle until it becomes something you can live with. Until it becomes, against all odds and logic, something you love. The people of Siberia did not choose easy lives. Many of them did not choose Siberia at all. Their ancestors were sent here, exiled here, driven here by forces entirely beyond their control. And yet, generation after generation, something extraordinary happened. The place that was meant to punish became the place that shaped. The exile became the home. The sentence became the identity. There is a woman I read about, a Sakha elder in a small village outside Yakutsk in her 80s, who has lived her entire life within a few kilometers of where she was born. She has watched the Soviet Union rise and fall. She has watched the permafrost shift beneath her feet. She has buried a husband, raised children, and seen her grandchildren leave for the cities in search of opportunities she never had. And when asked whether she would have chosen a different life if she could, she thought for a long moment and then said, "No. Because this land knows me. And I know it. And that is not nothing. That is everything." That answer has stayed with me. In a world that constantly tells us to want more, to go further, to upgrade and expand and accumulate experience like a currency, here is a woman who found the whole world in one frozen corner of it. Not because she had no choice, but because she understood something the rest of us are still figuring out. That rootedness is not the opposite of freedom. That knowing a place deeply, being known by it in return, that is its own kind of extraordinary. Siberia also teaches something about resilience that goes beyond the personal. We are living through a moment in history where the natural world is sending signals that are increasingly difficult to ignore. The glaciers are retreating. The oceans are warming. The permafrost that has held Siberia together for thousands of years, is beginning to let go. And the effects are not distant or abstract. They are here, now, measurable, visible, arriving ahead of every schedule scientists projected. Siberia sits at the center of that story. Not as a victim. Not as a warning. But as a mirror. Because what is happening in the Siberian permafrost right now is showing us, in the starkest possible terms, the cost of treating the natural world as a resource to be extracted rather than a system to be respected. The indigenous peoples of this land understood that relationship for thousands of years. They built entire cosmologies around it, spiritual frameworks in which the river, the forest, the animal, and the human being were not separate categories but participants in the same continuous conversation. We stopped listening to that conversation somewhere along the way. Siberia is asking us loudly now to start again. But I do not want to leave you with wait. Because Siberia, for all its seriousness, is also, and I cannot stress this enough, profoundly, unexpectedly, almost defiantly joyful. The Isyak festival in June, where thousands of Sakha people gather in traditional dress under a sky that never fully darkens, dancing and singing and drinking kumis and celebrating the simple, staggering fact of being alive in this impossible place. The old men in Yakutsk who sit outside in -20 degrees playing chess on a stone table in the park as if the temperature is a minor inconvenience. The children in Oymyakon, the coldest inhabited place on earth, running out of school at the end of the day, shrieking and laughing and throwing themselves into snowdrifts with the pure, uncomplicated happiness of children everywhere. Joy is not a product of comfort. Siberia proves that beyond any argument. Joy is what happens when human beings decide, in the face of every reason not to, that this life, this specific, difficult, beautiful, freezing, luminous life, is worth celebrating, worth protecting, worth passing on. That is what Siberia looks like, where time stopped. Not frozen. Not defeated. Not waiting to be rescued by the modern world or connected to faster internet or made more convenient or more comfortable or more like everywhere else. Just alive. completely, stubbornly, magnificently alive. In the end, that might be the most radical thing this place has to offer. Not its history, not its landscapes, not its record-breaking cold or its ancient cultures or its impossible railways crossing impossible terrain. But this simple, shattering reminder, delivered quietly by a land that has outlasted every empire that ever tried to claim it. That to endure is not merely to survive. To endure, with grace, with community, with your feet planted in the soil you know and your face turned toward whatever weather is coming, is to be fully, completely, irreducibly human. Siberia knows this. And now, so do you. Thank you for watching. If this journey meant something to you, share it, save it, pass it on. Subscribe for more stories from the places the world forgot to pay attention to. And until the next journey, take care of each other out there. Just alive. Completely, stubbornly, magnificently alive. In the end, that might be the most radical thing this place has to offer. Not its history, not its landscapes, not its record-breaking cold or its ancient cultures or its impossible railways crossing impossible terrain. But this simple, shattering reminder, delivered quietly by a land that has outlasted every empire that ever tried to claim it. That to endure is not merely to survive. To endure, with grace, with community, with your feet planted in the soil you know and your face turned toward whatever weather is coming, is to be fully, completely, irreducibly human. Siberia knows this. And now, so do you. Thank you for watching. If this journey meant something to you, share it, save it, pass it on. Subscribe for more stories from the places the world forgot to pay attention to. And until the next journey, take care of each other out there.